Hello friends and gamers, and welcome to the Fortress. My name is Jinx, and as you watch this video, or a few days before you watch this video, I am sitting at the spring offensive table planning out my Japanese turn. Now, I decided to film this a week beforehand on Friday, July 2, 2021. Let me refresh this page. Friday, July 2, 2021. The idea being is I'd film this beforehand and try to make a predictive strategy video of what the whole game is going to go, how it's going to unfold. Now, when it comes to predictive videos, they're pretty difficult because you could very broad strokes make a prediction that will most likely be correct. And it'll be something like, America is going to go to war against Japan and Germany. Yeah, obviously, right? It's going to go to war against Japan or Germany. That's usually the case in most games, like 99% of the games are going to turn out that way. Now, the more specific you get, the more likely you are going to be wrong. And also, but the more fun you get out of them as well. If I predict that America is going to invade South America, and I end up being right, then everyone's surprised you're right, and you get a lot of fun out of that. But at the same time, if I predicted wrongly, well, people are just going to say, well, obviously America would never do that. So it's one of those things that predictions, the funner they get, the less likely they are going to be. So I'm going to try to toe that line of trying to be sane enough and be reasonable enough without being too crazy and without being too obvious either. That's the idea there. So a lot of this strategy, I obviously know my Japanese strategy, what I intend on doing, but the Comintern strategy and the Allied strategy, they're a little bit more difficult to predict. The Germans and the Italians, I have a rough idea what they're going to do just because I've spoken with my allies, not specifically about strategy, but we've shared back and forth our thoughts on what's going to look like. But the Allies and the Comintern, they generally react to whatever the Axis do. Now, the Soviets are a little easier because they have a little window of time before they go to war against the Axis. But the Allies generally have to just react to whatever the Axis do without too much freedom to make independent plans. It's just pure reaction. That's about it. Now, these predictions are also based upon a fairly standard game where you don't have, like in the YouTube war Operation Winter Solace, where you don't have a tag team of Soviets and the Axis both tag teaming against the Allies. So it's not any of that. It's basically a more standard game where it's 1v1v1 as opposed to 2v1 or something like that. So that's just the idea there. It's just purely for fun as well too. It's not to, I'm not trying to antagonize anybody or anything like that. This is just purely me being a bit of a fool and enjoying myself as I try to predict what everybody's going to do, just for the enjoyment of the spectators as well as myself. So thank you all for watching, and stay tuned, sit tight, and enjoy the show. Germany's predicted strategy. Germany is played by Rank Carcass, who's an experienced player and knows how to butter his own bread. He has many games under his belt and has his own YouTube channel to prove it. So he's fantastic all around, and he knows his stuff. Absolutely. Germany is also playing as one of my allies, so me as playing Japan, we've communicated back and forth about what our strategies are going to be, and so I have a rough idea what his intentions are. And so he has a plate in front of him. He has a good deal to deal in front of him, but his primary concern, as far as I can gather, or what I would do, would be the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War is worth, well, 2 victory points to the Axis if they win that fight, and it's also worth 1 free infantry as soon as that fight is won to Germany, which is huge. It's a pretty huge deal. If you get it early on, that means you can get, 10 or 20, 10, maybe not 20, but a good chunk of turns. Let's see if the war ends in July 1945. You could theoretically get, if you win it in turn 2, you get 19 or 18 turns worth of infantry, and that's pretty massive. An infantry costs $3, right? So you get a little bit back out of the deal. Now, additionally, you get something else out of the deal, is keeping that out of Republican hands. You keep their free infantry out of Republican hands. The Moscow or Russia would get 1 free infantry each and every turn as well. But additionally, they would get 3 victory points out of winning the Spanish Civil War. One for worldwide domination, which is control of territory outside of Russian home territory with IPP value. So 1, 2, and an ice-free port in Andalusia. So 3 victory points there. So it's quite valuable for the Germans to not only grab it for themselves, but to keep it out of communist hands. Very important, I think. Now, this game will see something different when it comes to the Spanish Civil War because the rules have changed slightly, where in the base rule set, 1 allied nation per turn, or allied power per turn, can lend these to either side in the Spanish Civil War. So we'll see a little bit more, we might see a little bit more people playing with the mechanic and investing into the Republican or the nationalist side, the British or the French. The USA, as far as I can gather, still can't invest there until they get to an income level of at least 15 IPP, I believe. I think it's 15 because they need that much before they start lending lease to nations at war with a major power. So unless I'm outdated here, I'm not sure when they could start sending that lend lease. All right, so it's important for the Germans to win this fight. So the Germans are going to send lend lease to Spain, my prediction anyways, and from the discussion with Rank Carcass, to try to win this fight. So a fighter on turn 1, possibly a fighter on turn 2, and after that possibly another fighter on turn 3, just to try to win this fight. We'll deal with the Republican side momentarily once we talk about the Russian stuff, but I think it's important to win this fight. The Italians are going to invest into it a little bit, but not overly much, because they don't have as many resources to spend, and they have their own thing to deal with as well. Germany, in the mid-war, has to focus on two different things. It has to focus on taking out France, and it has to take over Poland as well. So what they will do likely in the mid-war side of things is, well, they'll build up enough forces to try to take out both at once. If you don't take them both out at once and take them out completely, then the Polish fighter survives in this case. And in the case of France, well, their aircraft can survive as well. And not only that, if you have a particularly ambitious British player, you could even see a British landing or reinforcement of Paris. So it's quite, it could be quite interesting if you don't win in a certain turn. So you need to launch that attack and win it quite quickly. Now, as Rank Carcass has stated that he's going to go to war in January 1940. So we'll see if that comes to pass. I think fair enough. I think that's good. I'm usually an Axis player that goes in a little earlier than normal. Oftentimes I go in, I try to go in. The way I see it, if you go in earlier, then that means America's out of the war one turn longer. One turn longer, you don't have to worry about them. So January 1939 often is when I kick off this fight. It just makes the most sense to me, unless I really need to reposition and get into better position. So that's two things that Germany has to do. Early war, Spanish Civil War, and once the war breaks out, then deal with Poland and France. It also has to deal with building up a convoy line system, a convoy rating system as well. So it needs to focus on, this is worth $5, this is worth $6 here, another $6 here, $3 here, $1 here, 3 there, etc. I think it's important that they go after these convoy lines and try to wipe them out as quick as they possible, or not wipe them out, but raid them and put the pressure every which way they can, because that disperses the British fleet. So what I expect to see, not confirmed, but what I expect to see is German submarines spread on every convoy line, and I hope to see them all the way out here in the Indian Ocean and here threatening Anzac stuff. Reason being is Japan can't go to war immediately, otherwise they'll bring America right into the war, and so it'd be nice to see some German units all the way out this way, because that also has the added benefit of keeping some of these British forces out this way as well, which collectively does two things. It takes away the income from the Commonwealth, but additionally it keeps them out of the Mediterranean. And by keeping the enemy out of the Mediterranean, it allows the Italians to actually get a little bit stronger and build up some forces, and when they do make their punch, to make a good solid punch. So what I would like to see, what I would see kind of optimistically, is Germans building, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They'd be having 7 submarines at the start of the game and threatening every single convoy line and forcing those British to spread themselves out, and possibly even more. 8 or 9 would be ideal, but I expect there'll be probably 6, I think, but we'll have to see. I expect somewhere around 6 at the start of the war. And that is the mid-war stuff, and I might make a separate prediction video about the late war. I suppose we could tag on into the mid-war something like this. The Germans are going to invade Yugoslavia and take out Thessaly. That might change, because with the campaign medals, they might not want to go to Thessaly and leaving it up to the Italians to grab the whole of Greek territory. So that might occur instead, but that is a rough prediction. Now, in regards to Denmark, oftentimes the current meta is to not go after Denmark, because that way you'd never have to worry about the Danish Straits, being breached. So we might see the Germans not go in there. But I expect, because the campaign medals also incentivize the person to go into the, capture Denmark, I expect that the Germans will go there in the end. In regards to Norway, that's a tough one, and it depends on the Russians, I think. But I expect, knowing Rank Carcass's some of his other strategy, I expect the Germans are going to go into Norway and try to take that one out. The whole idea being grabbing some bucks here and there and everywhere, just to bring up the German income a little bit in anticipation of the attack against Russia. Okay, let's talk about Russia now. So the Russian mid-war or early and mid-war strategy. Russia is played by General Hand Grenade, who is an experienced player, not only in Global War 36, he has tons of experience there, but he also has a lot of experience in Axis and Allies, and that's quite crucial as well. It doesn't exactly translate to experience in Global War 36, but it is a bit of experience nonetheless. It's quite valuable. The bones and the skeletal structure are the same. You're dealing with the same kind of animal, just one is more evolved than the other. so General Hand Grenade has some fantastic experience behind him. Now, what is the Russian strategy? Now, I haven't communicated with the Russians because they are not my friends in this. We're not playing as allies in this, and so this is pure guesswork. And when it comes to guesswork, I could very well be wrong. But what's the fun of it if I always just have safe predictions as to what will occur? Now, I think I should always throw in a little bit of a random prediction as well, just for fun. I predict there's not too much a person can predict for Germany as a random guess, but I predict Germany is going to, at some point during the game, invade the British Islands at Scotland. I suspect that's going to occur. And that's based on nothing at all, just pure guesswork. Let's get back to Russia. Now, in early game, Russia, can't go to war against anybody. And usually they can't go to war up until, July 1939. That's usually the case. I think the exception is if people do attack you. So Soviets are going to be out of the fight for a little bit, but they're not going to be sitting idle. They have some money to spend. And so the question is, where will they spend their, I believe, $8? They have $8 to spend. Let's take a look at the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War is worthwhile for them to win as well, because it gives them, that free infantry every single turn, plus those 3 victory points. Now, I didn't mention this on the German, so I'll lump it in here with this one. This game has changed a bit with version 3 in regards to the Spanish Civil War. It used to be that whatever you send as Lend-Lease to either side, it didn't really matter if your side won or lost. Or if your side won, you'd simply take away all the winning side and the losing side stuff. You'd take away everything off the board and replace it with a predetermined amount of Spanish units, whether they be nationalist or Republican, and that was it. So you could send in Lend-Lease turn after turn after turn of fighters, but that had little usage because at the end of the day, you still had to take them off. Now with version 3, it's changed up a little bit that you don't have to remove your units. They stay there, kind of unaligned up until you align them, and then you get them all back. So it's more beneficial to invest more heavily into the Spanish Civil War for both sides, because you still get to get that investment back. So you can go quite a bit heavier if you wanted to. So the Republicans would like to win the Spanish Civil War as well. It gives the Russians a lot out of the deal. So I expect we'll see a heavier investment here. But Russia has a little less income to do, so they're not going to Lend-Lease a fighter on turn 1. They're probably going to Lend-Lease a mountain infantry, which is quite good. Defense in mountains is a 5. That's not much worse off than the fighter. The only difference is the fighter is more of an attacking unit, and the mountain infantry for more of a defense. But for the cost difference of 6, I think it's well worth it. I think that's what I would do initially too, as Russians. That's what I expect. Mountain infantry turn 1, because they'll also have $3 left over, and then the Allies will probably put a bit of pressure on them to do something else with that $3, and the pressure will be, help us in the Abyssinian War. I think that's what the pressure will be. Help us in the Abyssinian War with that $3. And then in exchange of doing that, the Allies might Lend-Lease to the Russians another unit over here. So because they're allowed to do that now. So let's say Britain Lend-Leases a unit to the Republicans, an infantry. Russia Lend-Leases a unit to Abyssinia, an infantry, and France Lend-Leases a unit here as well. That's 2 infantry, 2 militia here in Abyssinia. That's what I expect to occur, kind of a tit for tat, you scratch my back, I scratch yours exchange on the first, on the very first turn at the least. We'll get into some interesting stuff later on with France in regards to this, but we'll leave it at that. Okay, the other thing that Russia's got going on is, over here, the Soviet-Japanese border clashes. Now, those ones are going to be interesting. I'm going to do my best to try to sign a peace between the two of us, a non-aggression pact between the two of us. I don't want to be distracted by this kind of war going back and forth, and I think it's a bit futile, so I'd like to sign a peace agreement. I suspect General Hand Grenade is not going to sign. I expect he's not going to want to sign. I think he'll want to keep that open because it's, he keeps me on my toes a little bit on this side of things, and at the same time, it doesn't cost him anything because his units aren't going to be in usage for the first bit anyways. He's going to want to keep his units here furthermore, because I suspect, in the mid-war prediction, he's going to go and attack Mongolia. He'll keep his units here sitting in these 3 territories, and then on the turn before he's allowed to declare war, move a lot of his units here, and then one turn take out these 2 territories. It'll be, the first round, yeah, he'll be rolling some 1s, but the second round, the defense is only at 2, and he gets $2 out of the deal as well. So I think that is the current meta in these games as well. Take out Mongolia, and I think it should be, less advantageous to the common turn. I suspect probably what I would do if I was a designer is to say, if Russia declares war on Mongolia, then either American income goes down, but I don't see the reason for that. I think it's probably more suitable that if Russia declares war on Mongolia, their own income should go down by a dice roll of 1d6 or something like that. I think that would be good. And that makes it a little bit less interesting for them to go into. Still, maybe that's not sufficient, so maybe it needs to be 1d12, but that's a little bit steep. The idea there being that there was never any intention for Russia to invade Mongolia, never reason whatsoever. But that would be why they would not sign the non-aggression pact between these 2 guys, the Japanese and Soviet non-aggression pact. There'll be something else that they do mid-war, is a declaration on another neutral. Will it be Iran? I suspect not. I don't think it will be Iran. I think it won't be Turkey either. If they go into Iran, it kind of antagonizes the British. The British get out of this deal, I believe they get, $3? No, $2 if this stays neutral. So they don't want to do that. Sure, it'd give them $3 by grabbing it. It's pretty cheap to grab them. 2 infantry you have to attack, but it antagonizes the Commonwealth a bit too much. So I don't think the Russians are going to go there. That's not my prediction. Now, if they were going anywhere, this would be my second choice, but I think they're not going to go this direction this game. Will they go into Turkey? I don't think so either. The return on investment is not too high. It's $3 here. If you attack here on 1 round, these guys will simply move off here, and I have a defense in a city. And so the city defense is 3 infantry, artillery in that. That's quite nice of a defense in a mountain territory, and you don't get too much out of it. You'll lose more units you might lose more units than you'd get in return for several turns. And you don't have loads and loads of time either. And in fact, it might be a case that if Russia declares war here, then moves on to here, by the time the Russians are ready to go here, the Germans may decide to declare war just to keep and preserve these units and preserve them in a city and grab hold of them and keep them. Now that is my 2 cents on the matter. And we'll have to see how that pans out. Quick thought for y'all. Do you think Turkey is a fully city territory? Now, this just occurred to me the other day. Normally, on the land-to-land territory, it's all circular, right? Like this is a circular kind of territory. And now, not all city territories are circular. You have Calcutta over here, which is a half circle, right? But this one, on its landward side, on the European side, is not circular. Now you'll have, usually everywhere else you look, most territories will be completely circular on their landward side, just everywhere you look. Rome, Paris, everything. But Turkey is the exception where one side is not circular. And I wonder if you attack from this side, it's a city, and if you attack from this side, it's not. But let me know your thoughts on that one. Additionally to, moving on from that. So I don't think the Russians are going to attack Turkey. I think the most likely option, as we said, was Mongolia, but not specifically Mongolia. I think they're going to go and wipe out Finland. And Finland completely. I think this game has very little reason for Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. There is some, but it's not huge. And let me just explain why I think that. So, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is worth $3 by signing it. So yeah, but in that case, you're only limited to attacking Karjala, and that's it, and that's the furthest you can get. But you get $3 out of the deal, which is excellent. But if you don't sign, you could press on to southern Finland and Lapland, and now you're guaranteed $2 more. And realistically, once you take Karjala, you've taken off the bulk of the enemy forces, you've gone over the hump, the rest is easy. So yes, you're not going to get as much as you'd like out of it. You get $2 instead of $3. The flip side of that is you get the $2 for the rest of the game until somebody takes it away from you, whereas the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact only gets you $3 up until Germany declares war on you. So it's more advantageous to pursue that and to capture it completely. Would be what I would say. Or a person can kind of game the system, I think a person can game the system. I may need to double check on this, but you're allowed to break that treaty anytime you like by declaration of war, I think it is, but maybe not even with that. Anyways, maybe it is a declaration of war, but theoretically you could sign it, hold on to it, and as soon as you can, break the treaty and grab the rest of these 2 territories. I may be wrong in that one, now that I come to think of it. But anyways, I think the Russians are going to completely grab Finnish territory instead of just signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Of course, that means that they won't be able to grab Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, but that could come a little bit later as well, and they could always do that, independently, instead of a combat walk-on, essentially. It was what it would be do before with no combat occurring. They would actually have to fight their way here. But maybe it's best to just let the Germans fight their way through there and then tackle the Germans later on and grab this instead. So my kind of crazier prediction in this game is Russia's going to attack Finland and conquer Finland completely. And now to step it up a notch, I don't think they're going to stop there. I think they're going to go and capture Sweden. Sweden, it's a bit of a tough choice because that allows the Germans to have a few extra ships. 2 coastal ships, torpedo boat destroyer, a coastal sub. That's pretty good to have in their pocket. But I suspect they're going to go and attack Sweden. 3 infantry on here, well, that's a bit tough. But if the Soviets bring their aircraft in here, there's no mountainous territory. They simply march onto this territory, capture it, capture a factory now, and then they could grab Gotland over here as well. That's quite nice and handy. And do that in July 1939. Sorry, not July. In July 1939, they walk onto here. January 1940 into here, and July 1940 here. They might, at the same turn they grab this, they might actually use the rest of their forces from here to grab all Norwegian territory, because they are in position to grab southern Norway and Trondelag with 1 infantry defending here, possibly 2 at that point, and only a militia there as well. And that way, that's what I expect to see prior to the game. And there's a bit of a crazier, further out there prediction, but I think it's really beneficial because at that point you have $3 you've gained over here. Now, if the Germans come and take away Norway earlier, well, yeah, that's a little bit less ideal. But the whole scoop here, it's so beneficial to the Russians to do that, is because you grab that and it takes away from the German income. I believe it takes away from them at least $2, because if Sweden is Sweden is neutral, they get $2 out of that deal. No, sorry, $3 out of that deal. And if Trondelag is in German hands, they also get $1 there. So by the Russians grabbing these 3 territories, they get these 2 territories, they get $3 each turn, but they also remove $3 of bonus income from the Germans, which is pretty excellent, a pretty excellent exchange. That really will antagonize the Germans, and they'll be pretty desperate to take it back. And that means they'll divert their initial punch northwards here instead of pushing into Russian territory down here. They'll need to do amphibious assault though, so that will be a little bit more difficult to do. But that is my kind of crazy prediction. At the earliest, simply just taking out all of Finland, and at the more extreme, taking out Sweden, and if they have time, take out Norway as well. And I think they will have time because Germany's not going to go to war until January 1940. So that means, by the time Germany set itself up to invade Russian territory, the Russians will have grabbed a few extra territories themselves. So that's what I expect to see in this game, as kind of a crazier strategy. Moving on to Japan. Now, I am playing as Japan, and yeah, I don't need to tout my credentials. Here we go. So as Japan is kind of fun to play because they're quite flexible, but you can't do everything as Japan. You can do a couple things with them, but you can't do too many, and the window closes fast, so you can choose one thing, and that's about it. So by that I mean is, yes, you can go after Calcutta and take it out. Yes, you can go after Australia. Yes, you can go after China and take them out. You may even be able to pull off taking out the American fleet over there, but you can't do all of them at once, or all of them roughly within a short time period of each other. It just doesn't work, and your resources will be so invested everywhere that you'll have a difficult time. So early war prediction, well, I can tell you roughly what my ideas are. I'm going to try to sign the non-aggression pact with Russia. I don't think it's going to succeed because they have ambitions in Mongolia and won't sign. That's okay, I'll withdraw my troops. I'm going to upgrade one of these, or maybe both of those militia, and pull them away from the border down south. That's my intention. At least one of them, I think. Now then we deal with this here. What will we do in China? My plan is to take out China as quick as I can and wipe them off the face of the earth. Now, in my previous game, so I was thinking about this the other day and talking about it with Rank Carcass. I've played, I always say roughly, between 15 and 20 games, and I stand by that. I think roughly 15 to 20 games. Let's take the lower number. Let's say I've played 15 games. 5 of those games I've played as either, the Commonwealth or Soviets, let's say, right? So not huge. 15 games sounds like a lot, but when you shrink it down to what you actually played, it's much, much less. So 5 of those games I've played as communists or allies. Now that leaves only 10 games left over for the Axis. So with 10 games as the Axis, what would I do with them? Well, let's say 4 of those games I've played as Germany alone. And so that leaves, or let's say 3 of those games I've played as Germany alone, which leaves 7 games in which I've played Japan as well as the rest of the Axis. Japan and the rest of the Axis. So 7 games. In those 7 games, 2 of those games I may have not have even touched Japanese territory, choosing to bypass and taking something like what we saw in Operation Winter Solace, taking this area here, the Money Islands, as well as maybe India, perhaps, right? Now, in those remaining 5 games, I have never wiped out China to the last man. I have never done it, and it's never succeeded for me. I may have attempted it, but I've never managed to succeed in doing it. So what usually happens is I take out, this kind of coastal area, maybe this one as well, and that's about it. That's about as far as I go. I might take some of these more mountainous central areas, but that's about it. There are games where I have taken out the CCP, but I've never taken out Yunnan. Just never ever occurs. Just because it's deep enough, and it's hard to do. It's hard to do. And they could receive lend-lease from here to here. Now, talking with other people say, yeah, China is steamrolled. Not in our games. And I suspect it's something to do with allied lend-lease. I find that allies in our games, or the games I've played in the past, were lend-leasing a unit each turn. Whoever was able to was lending a unit each turn to the KMT. And it was vicious. It was like if you could lend-lease them a fighter, you were lend-leasing them a fighter. That level of viciousness. And they just got too strong. So I have a spreadsheet. I'm a very analytical type of person. And so when I plan things out, I really plan things out very strategically. And sometimes I'll even take a spreadsheet and really plan things out in that regards too. Not always, of course. And that's usually just when I'm experimenting with some initial strategy. But my thinking was, if I went 100% first or second turn with an attack into Kwangtung with everything that could reach, would I be able to take Yunnan? And I think the answer is no. Because if you attack on the second turn, these 2 guys come marching into here. And that makes it just too strong. You have 3 infantry here, a mountain infantry here, 2 cavalry. You have all this here. And then if the KMT decide to, they could put down a couple militia. It's just too dang strong. And so that's a tough one to beat. You'd have to spend several turns gearing up for an attack into Yunnan. And in the meantime, the Allies, if the Burma Road is open, sending lend-lease into Yunnan. So that's not going to occur. So my time frame for attacking China is going to be dependent on the CCP. Now, it used to be that they would make an alignment roll at the start of their turn. They've thankfully switched that up, and now you do it at the end of their turn. So they roll for alignment for, they will go for the Northern Warlord first. If they succeed, well, I might attack turn 2. But my ideal plan is to attack, if they succeed, I might attack turn 1, just because I don't want all these units to withdraw into Shenxi. That makes Shenxi way too powerful. So I don't want to attack turn 1, but I might be forced to do that. Ideally, I'd attack turn 3. I think it's important to attack turn 3. Why don't I want to attack turn 1? Because I feel like I need to upgrade this factory. I think that's very important to make it a major factory, get those 2 tech rolls instead of just 1. So I don't want to attack turn 1. I don't want to attack turn 2. I want to attack turn 3. And in turn 3, my intention is to take out this whole Northern Warlord, as well as the Southern Kwangtung Warlord. That is the plan. And leaving just a central area here, as well as that, kind of doing a pincer movement on China. And I think this is pretty standard with everybody. If they go after China, these 2 areas. Now, oftentimes in my previous games, usually what I do is just take out all the coastal territories with money and focus on the money first. In this game, I'm focusing on taking out the places of strength. So this stack with militia plus the 2 infantry, that's the plan there. Taking out the places of strength and dealing with them a little later, and thereby putting pressure on everything that is in China. By grabbing this Suyan, I'm putting pressure on basically everything except for these 2 backwater territories of Xinjiang and Tibet over here. Now, I was thinking, if the CCP is successful in aligning this Northern Warlord, I may not even attack then. I still might wait for turn 3, because that means they have this stack, and sure, those guys move here. And that's too bad. But at the same time, it also might mean that they are going to be moving. They have an advantage to rolling for this one, Xinghai. And if they get Xinghai on the second turn, then on turn 3 when I attack, on turn 3 when I attack, on the third turn if the CCP are successful, they might get one of these guys. But on turn 3 when I attack, now I'm just dealing with, if I attack Kwangtung and this Northern Warlord area, so I'm dealing with KMT somewhere here, maybe Yunnan, maybe these guys, Well, these guys will obviously be, this will be KMT, but it'll kind of split the Chinese Civil War the troops roughly in half. And that's not a bad thing either, to split them in half. So I might do that, still attack turn 3, regardless of what the CCP do. I need to move on from that, so let's talk about other things. Then in the mid-war, I'm going to grab this. And then it takes us to the late war, and in late war, I have an idea what I want to do, but I'm not going to say because I may make another video talking about late war strategy. But the idea there is, once I take this, it boosts up the American income sufficiently, and that brings us to the American inclusion in the war, and that's really tough to say what's going to happen there. So it's going to be kind of a classic game for me. I think it's going to be a classic game for everybody. Take China, take the Money Islands. That's basically my plan. Next on, we move on to the British Commonwealth. The British Commonwealth have a few things they need to worry about. They need to worry about the defense of Britain so that London is not captured. So I think they might eventually build coastal artillery right there. I think that would make sense. They also need to worry about their British convoy lines because that's the source of their income. It's huge, right? So if you have Britain spread out everywhere, or they have to spread themselves out a little bit. So I suspect they're going to keep enough forces around the British Islands to throw off the Germans, but they're also going to establish a couple of raiding forces, and those are anti-submarine forces, and those forces are going to float around knocking out submarines in the Atlantic is the idea there. And they may even venture into the South Atlantic, but that's what they're going to do. Lastly, they're going to keep a small fleet over here as well, matching the Italian fleet. So there's going to be some going back and forth. They also are going to focus on protecting Gibraltar a bit and building up Eastern Egypt. Eastern Egypt is worth, I think I did a math the other day, and I'll do it again here for fun because it always strikes me as really surprising. So FEC gets $2 for Eastern Egypt if Eastern Egypt is in Allied hands. The Great Britain gets $3 for Suez Canal, so that's already looking at 5. And the Anzac get $2 as well. So actually, no, they don't get $2. So that's $5 gained from there. And the French get $1 for having Eastern Egypt. So you're looking at $6 collectively for wartime bonuses, plus $1 here for the territory value. This is worth $7 to the Allies, just collectively. That's huge. Plus it's worth, I think, 2 victory points here. So that is very important for the Allies to hold on to Eastern Egypt. So we'll see some major reinforcements there. So the Commonwealth has to focus on defensive here, because that's quite important. They have to focus on the defense of Gibraltar so that they can keep reinforcing the Mediterranean and reinforcing Eastern Egypt. That's quite important to hold on to as well. They need to focus on defense of the convoy lines in general, wherever they can, to the point where they actually might have to give up on some of these ones so they have a proper defense elsewhere. They need to focus also on holding on to, say, Aden a little bit, because that's where the FEC has bonus income. South African Union, that factory is important as well, especially if you're not building a Cairo factory. You need to hold on to that one a little bit. India also needs to be held on to. Calcutta is important. Now, luckily, if Calcutta falls, you're still collecting income. You're not surrendered. You don't surrender as India, so that's quite nice. And you can still receive lend-lease here and build your colonial infantry and militia. But that factory is quite vital to have too, because you need that, and it's a good defensive position, and you want that in the fight. So you could keep pumping out the odd fighter or the odd infantry as needed. Now, Malaya is also important for $2 here. It's also worth a victory point to them, but they might have to lose that at least temporarily. And then we move on to here, to the Anzac. The Anzac have to hold on to Sydney and New Zealand so that they get stay in the fight. If they lose those 2 areas, they surrender. So it's important for them. So what will we see with the FEC fleet? Depends on the Germans. If the Germans come floating in here, then you might see them holding back a fighter and a destroyer and perhaps this heavy cruiser. But that, I think, is not going to occur. They're going to send their battleship and a couple of their other ships here to the Mediterranean, is my suspicion. It'll be the Anzac forces that stay here and try to deal with any German incursion. So that's why I do hope to see the German submarine here, because that, if you send in 2 German subs here to the Pacific or to the Indian Ocean, it attracts, at the very least, a destroyer, a light cruiser, and perhaps another ship. It attracts, say, a third more than what you send here. So if you send in 2 subs, they'll keep 3 ships over here. I think that's important. It's kind of disproportionate what they'll send in, which is awesome for Italy. Italy wants the British fleet to be dispersed. In Operation Winter Solace, I had all the German subs bottled basically up here in the Atlantic, so I never had to worry about it too much, and therefore I could coalesce my big fleets into the Med and into the North Atlantic and never have to worry about any subs. Now, at one point, a German submarine did escape down south here, but I used a small force like a medium bomber to deal with that, and it worked out quite nicely. So I think it's important for Germany to build sufficient submarines to go everywhere. And so I think the total they need to have at the start of the war is between, well, I think 8 is ideal. That way they can threaten all the way down here, and it really helps out the Italians. Like, I mean, a lot. Anyways, we're talking about Britain, not about Germany. So what will Germany do? Let's start with the Anzac. The Anzac will function as a thorn in the side. This fleet will stay here, and it'll function as a thorn in the side to the Japanese. Just a constant threat. You never know where they're going to go. You have to keep some forces here so that they have to protect their islands. So the transport's going to stay here to threaten the Japanese-held territories over here. That's what's going to occur. Anzac is in an interesting position as well, too, where they're just a little bit too far away from the nearest Japanese naval base up there. So you can see an attack coming. So you can use your forces here to go capture stuff and still kind of have that relatively safe. The FAC, it'll remove its battleship and perhaps its heavy cruiser, and that's going to go into the Mediterranean. But the rest of it may stay here if Germans make an appearance. And they'll hold on to this stuff. Defend, defend, defend is their priority. Hong Kong, a tiny bit, maybe not at all. British Malaya, a little bit more because it's a city territory, a mountain territory, and it's got already a fortified line. So that's a little bit more likely. Whereas Hong Kong could be easily surrounded because it starts off surrounded, and then once you have 3 ships here, then it's completely surrounded. So British Malaya, defended. Calcutta, defended. And at the same time, the rest of their income shipped across the Burma Road to support Yunnan. That's what I expect to see. All right, moving on from that, we have the British, and like I said, holding on to the Cairo factory, the South Cape factory, if the Cairo factory is not being built, holding on to Eastern Egypt for those $7, holding on to Gibraltar so that it's, so you can secure the Med and keep the Italians at bay, holding them into this area here. Now, a point was made by Rank Carcass that, well, I'm not going to give away that point, but Gibraltar is interesting. And here we have the British Islands where we need to protect as well, and all these convoy lines. Like, that's huge. They got enough stuff on their plate. What predictions do I have as for Britain? What crazy prediction could I predict for them? I don't have too many crazy predictions for them, but I'll give you one nonetheless. I suppose the craziest thing that they're going to do is lend-lease straight from the start to Republicans in the Spanish Civil War. That's about as crazy as I can get with them because there's not too much else that they can do. We might see some crazy stuff with the British sending troops to assist in the fight against Norway, because that's in the campaign medals, and a few other odds and ends on the map, some reinforcement of Greece and that kind of thing. But the Commonwealth primarily plays a defensive game for a long time, so they don't have much that they can actually expend in other things. So we don't have too many crazy predictions from them. Moving on to France now. So France has 3 different ways you could approach France and 3 different ways of playing them. My way of playing France, like a lot of people write off France completely and say, they're going to lose, guaranteed, why even bother putting up a stiff defense? I'm of the camp, of that military camp that says, sure, they form a speed bump, and sure, the Germans can, drive right over them, but you can definitely make them slow down. You could definitely take out a lot of their units in the process, and sometimes disproportionately more that they would lose than you would lose. And I think that's important as well. So that's one camp of looking at it. The defense of France is paramount. Another way of looking at it is kind of a middle of the road. Well, it's not going to happen. The speed bump is minuscule. We just need to slow them down, but it's not going to do much. And the last way is a full-out give up on France. And I think that camp is wrong. I don't think a person should give up in France. But now a person can give up in France in a creative way. Abyssinia. So the current meta, it seems to be the current way things people like to do, is reinforce Abyssinia as much as possible. I'm not crazy about that idea, to be honest. I think it's a little bit, anyways, I'm not crazy about that idea, but I do see its merits. So if France pours every turn 1 unit down here, France can therefore potentially win this fight. They have to win it by capturing Eritrea, which is It's a desert and also mountain territory, I believe. That's a little hard to see, but desert and mountain territory. So they need to grab Eritrea for that. Now that is going to be difficult for them, very difficult for them to attack that and win that. But France can use this as a place to store away its income, essentially, for a little bit later. You build units, you build, and then later on, you're surrendering the defense of France, but you have a bunch of units here. So say from the start of the game, you invested 1 infantry there each turn. And if war broke out on the 7th turn, you would have 6 infantry over here that you wouldn't otherwise have. And if the Abyssinians win this fight, then that means you have 6 infantry, that free French infantry, that you would not have had otherwise. This would become free French in that case if they've won that fight. That's important. Now, another way of giving up, which is the creative way of giving them up, is getting the Russians to send Lend-Lease here too. But the Russians aren't going to want to do it willingly, and so they would want you to scratch their back. And so what the French could do if they want to wholeheartedly or full-throatedly give up on Abyssinia is France says, I will Lend-Lease to the Republic in Spain, because you could do that now, 1 infantry each turn if you Lend-Lease Russia to Abyssinia 1 infantry each turn. So that changes Abyssinia up. Now instead of having 6 infantry in 1939, now you have 12 infantry in 1939. And that's a huge chunk of French income effectively saved, because you have 2 of your guys essentially coming here, and the Russians get 2 of their guys showing up here. It's a tit-for-tat exchange. The Republicans are happy because they capture nationalist Spain, and the French are happy because they squirreled away some of their income over here. So that is my crazy prediction for France in this game. Something like that will occur. Now, I could be wrong in that. Maybe that's something that they won't see in the rules or see the advantageous abilities of. The French and the British are played by Madman Dan, which I think is really cool. I've never played against this guy before, but he is very sharp and good. And he's also been a fellow that's been commentating on the campaign medals, and I really appreciate that. He's been in it from the start and kind of see how things go. So fantastic. All right. So the Republican Spain will be happy because they're winning. They get 2 units to the nationalist, 2 units Lend-Leased as well. They might actually win that fight. And I think at the end of the day, the Russians will be happier with this deal than they will be happier, than they would have otherwise have done. I expect to see that. Now, for Italy, we'll get into the Italian stuff momentarily. Yeah, we'll get to the Italian stuff momentarily. I suspect that's what's going to occur this game as people try a new mechanic out. So that means the defense of France will be depleted a little bit more than it would otherwise be. France starts off with 6 starting bucks per turn, so you could definitely afford to send in a Lend-Lease unit here, as was to Abyssinia, but that leaves very little for the defense of France. Now, what a person could also do is save their aircraft, their fighter and their medium bomber, by flying them to Abyssinia after it becomes... No, you might not be able to do that, because Abyssinia is technically not allied to you at this point, so you can't fly them down there to park there and wait there. You have to keep them in French territory. But yeah, you get the idea. Maybe a person can simply park them in some place nearby, and then hopefully they survive. If you're giving up on France in general, perhaps you should evacuate it 100%, or not. It really depends on the player. I suspect not. I suspect some defense is better than none, so that the Germans don't walk in too early. So you go in Alsace, Lorraine, and Paris, and hold on to those territories roughly equally, take off some German casualties, and kind of surrender it. What I would like to see in a game is where France is defended tooth and nail from the start of the game. I tried to do that in Operation Winter Solace, but I missed out on some of the income I would have otherwise have gotten because the Japanese never invaded China. Otherwise, I would have had a couple extra bucks to spend on, and the Germans never invaded Bohemia until very late. So it's 2 extra bucks I was deprived of, and if I had those 2 bucks, I may have been able to hold out the Germans. But it didn't occur that game. In the future. All right, moving on. So the defense of France is paramount. Now, after that, it's hard to say, because if France falls, or when France falls, you have no idea what's going to go Vichy or not. One prediction I have is the French submarines are going to come over here. Because if the French submarines come here and they turn Vichy, well, the convoy lines over here are primarily Japanese, with 10 bucks of raidable stuff over here. Whereas if they turn Vichy in Atlantic waters, well, between the Mediterranean, 6 bucks here, the Portuguese over there, 6 bucks and 5 bucks, you're looking at, that's 12, 17, and then you have another 3 bucks there. You're already looking at 20, so already double within a small area. So it makes more sense for the French fleet to come here, and if they become Vichy, they're kind of relatively useless because they just function as Japanese at that point. If they stay allied, you could raid the convoy lines here, and if they sunk, then it doesn't really matter because they're sunk, right? So that's what my other crazy prediction for France is. It makes all kinds of sense to me. Moving on from that point, let's talk about Italy. Italy is played by Panzer King, and who is a fun, charismatic individual who really knows his stuff as well. It's always a pleasure to play with this guy, and we're playing at his table, so it'll be a lot of fun to have him around. What's my prediction for Italy? Well, it depends quite a bit on the Allies and what the Allies allow for. But my prediction is something like this. Italy will lend lease to the Nationalist Spain because it will have to, because there'll be a unit showing up from France or Britain as well as Russia. So Italy's going to lend lease an infantry to the Nationalists, at least on turn 1 and possibly turn 2. After that, no clue. And then Italy will focus on other things, and one of the things they may focus on is winning the Abyssinian fight. Now let's look at that for a second. I was toying in my head if, so I've talked with strategy with Panzer King, but there's nothing really concrete since it depends so much on the Allies. So let me make a bit of a prediction here. If France goes all out in the defense of Abyssinia, I was debating in my head if we just let them have it, what would happen then? Because they can't win the fight until they capture Eritrea. What if you waited until you keep those units trapped here? You know, they got 3 or 5 infantry here. Let's say 6 infantry here. And so you park 3 infantry here, or you build a couple militia up here in the mountains. Now that means anything attacking there, the 5 infantry attacking into Eritrea are going to be rolling at 1. Pretty minimal. Rolling at 1 into the mountains. And now you have 2 units here plus a militia. You know, that's not gonna, that's gonna be hard for them to win that fight. So yes, you might see French pouring income after income into here, but these will always stay neutral for a long time. And then at one point you could simply evacuate everybody out if you want to. Just remove them all up and put them where you need them to be. You could even stage it in such a way where you have a transport or 2 over here, and then the Italians, in a fell swoop, attack from both sides, from Eritrea. Like this all looks like it's just the defense of Eritrea. And then in a fell swoop you attack eastern Egypt from north and south with a couple transports from the Mediterranean as well as a transport from down south here. I think that would be pretty interesting to see. So that's something that might occur if France pours 100% of its attention here. Otherwise, you could simply withdraw everything, let them win it, is another idea, and just be done with them at that point, is another option. Because realistically, this is worth a victory point, but it's the same victory point you'd get if you captured, say, Aden or Stalingrad. It's the same victory point that you'd get, so it's not that important. So you could even let them have it immediately if you wanted to do so. The downside is you might lose Italian Somaliland. I'm not sure how that works. The rules, as far as I can gather, the rules don't say if the Abyssinians can come into Italian Somaliland. I suspect they can, and so you might lose that $1. So that is too bad. I need to double check the rules on that one though. So we might see that occurring. But the other early war prediction, and perhaps a mid-war prediction, is that Italy will simply attack in one fell swoop something. And I suspect what they'll try to attack for, or what I'm encouraging them to attack, is Gibraltar. I think it's very important because once you grab Gibraltar, you can usually hold on to the Mediterranean for a good while anyways, especially if the Germans assist in the defense of Gibraltar. So that's what I'd like to see. After that, you could start thinking about Eastern Egypt, but instead of doing amphibious assault, you could land push units here from Cyrenaica to Western Egypt and into Eastern Egypt, and don't have to risk losing your units in an amphibious assault, or from north-south, from Transjordan down south here. Now that leads us to second point. Once you launch your attack against any Commonwealth, the clock is ticking. Sorry, I should rather say once this becomes Free French and they're in the war, the clock starts ticking. Turn 1, the Free French can come up here. Turn 2, they're up here in Eastern Egypt. And now Eastern Egypt will never fall. So there is advantages in wiping out the Abyssinian force, if at all possible, because then you don't have to have that ticking time bomb coming down on your head, and could actually plan out your attack a little bit better, planning on attacking at the appropriate time. Now, Italy also has a cool little feature where it could attack a turn before Germany. So it could attack on, if Germany is going to war in January 1940, so then theoretically Italy could declare war on July 1939. Now that will allow certain other things to occur for sure. Like that means that the French, they could possibly declare war on Germany, I think. Let's see. No, it can't. It wouldn't be able to declare war on Germany. So they won't have that much of an advantage. But anyways, you get the picture. If Italy launches that attack, it could do some interesting things. Invade southern France, and maybe if they built themselves a medium tank as well, it could even push on to Aquitaine. There's that option there. You could also take your enemy by surprise by attacking Gibraltar as well. With the first strike, even before the Germans are at war, grab Gibraltar is another option. So we might see that occurring. As long as you just avoid the French fleet. That's the important thing, since the French fleet might be sunk anyways once France surrenders. So that is the goal to work towards. So Italy, in short, is a little hard to say what might occur. I suspect, if possible, Abyssinia will be taken out, and once in the mid-war occurs, Italy will take out Gibraltar. Now, at the same time, Gibraltar might wait. Italy might have to simply just wait until it might have to wait the whole game out, keeping on hold of its victory points if things are going well. And now lastly, the Americans. And the Americans are purely late war, so they're really hard to discuss. So let's discuss the KMT stuff first. What will the KMT do? Well, it'll probably keep its forces here along the border, and then it will withdraw once they're at war. So it will first turn move its units here to defend Nanking, leaving Shantung open, I suspect, because they don't have enough units to defend everything. And then the second turn kind of equalize everything, and the third turn equalize it further. And then after that, we'll have to see what they do. And then once they're at war, either hold on to these areas and then also hold on to Yunnan. I think that's important. And there's not too much to say about them, so we'll leave it at that. Back to the Americans. I can't say too much about the Americans since they're purely late war. And if I do another video talking about the Americans or the late war predictions, then we'll have to leave them as is. And I want to release this earlier rather than later. I don't want to release it for late war stage because I think it's fun to have leave that bit a little bit ambiguous. And that is it, people. That is all I wanted to talk about. So what are your thoughts and comments on that? Have I turned out to be correct? Have I turned out to be correct with all my predictions? I think some of them are a little bit more out there. Some of them are a little bit more sane and reasonable. But I think in general, there's not too much crazy stuff to talk about. I did talk about what some of the potential crazy stuff could be for France and for the Soviets and for Germany. But there's not too much crazy I could predict without giving too much away. Of course, I'm not going to predict too much for my allies. It'll be for the allies and the Soviets I'll predict. So I have limits to what I can predict on. So I predicted as the Soviets are going to do a crazier strategy where they go after Sweden this game, and definitely don't sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and just grab all of Finland. They'll also grab Mongolia in the pre-war. The allies might do a crazy thing where they invest heavily into Republican Spain. And France might do something equally crazy where they invest heavily into Abyssinia, so that they can actually, well, they'll preserve their forces there. That might be the crazy thing that we see, but I could very well be wrong. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I hope you're enjoying the spring offensive as much as I am. Cheers.